Mosaic, a daily news program from WorldLink TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Welcome to the news of the hour from Abu Dhabi Television. American President Bush says that his country will submit a new draft resolution on Iraq to the Security Council tonight.
Today we're going to submit a resolution to the UN Security Council that spells out what the world has witnessed the last months. The Iraqi regime is not disarming. The Iraqi regime is not disarming as required by last fall's unanimous vote of the Security Council.
The British Defense Secretary expresses concern in Kuwait over German reports that state that Iraqi missiles are moving in the direction of Kuwait. From Kuwait, our correspondent Hashem Ahel-Barah.
He is overseeing his country's troops and says that the solution to the crisis is in the hands of the Iraqi president Saddam Hussein. 10,000 Arab soldiers will be in Kuwait early next month.
Sharon includes the Shinu Secular Party in his coalition government and will give its representatives 5 ministerial pouches. He eliminates the Labour Party from the National Unity Government. From Jerusalem, our correspondent Leila Aouda.
Ariel Sharon succeeded in making a new agreement with the Shinoy Secular Party after signing a similar agreement with the Mifdai Religious Party. The new government is the first of its kind in Israel. It has secular and extremist intentions, a contradictory mix which will lead to huge differences and alliances.
This is the end of the news in brief.
In Ankara, the Turkish government announced that it will ask Parliament to give the green light for the deployment of American forces on its soil. Meanwhile, Turkey is approaching the decisive point in its negotiations with the United States of America. The negotiations surround Turkey's demands and interests that are linked with Washington's threat of war against Iraq. On the other hand, an American military ship unloaded military equipment at the Iskenderuna port in Turkey. The shipment consisted of approximately 300 military vehicles as well as various other military equipment. Moreover, the American forces unloaded another military ship at the Iskenderuna port last week. It unloaded over 200 military vehicles. The ship is still at port under the protection of 250 American soldiers.
His Majesty the King has affirmed that peace, not war, is what the Middle East region needs most. In a speech delivered on behalf of His Majesty at the opening session of the Non-Aligned Movement Summit in Malaysia, His Royal Highness Prince Faisal said that the Middle East region is the most dangerous place in the world as the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is still going on. King Abdullah pointed out that talking about war at this time diverts all efforts exerted to combat international terror. He also stressed that members of the non-aligned movement should have a more effective role in shaping international decisions and also work towards achieving more development.
Enough is enough. We need to move forward now on the road to peace. Mr. Chairman, the situation in Iraq is another great challenge. Iraq is an important member of the movement as well as the League of Arab States. The crisis unfolding here has dire consequences for the world. Peace, not war, is what is needed in the Middle East. Talk of war only diverts us from concentrating our efforts on the important fight against international terror. That fight is a continuous process and one that needs the full attention and cooperation of our nations. Today, Jordanians, like so many others in the world, are experiencing war fatigue. World opinion is against war. The international community seeks peaceful means to resolve conflict, and those means exist, manifested by Security Council resolutions and the will of the international community. In the Iraqi crisis, the Security Council must continue to have the primary responsibility. We hope all parties will continue to respect this fact and that the United Nations will see its resolutions faithfully implemented.
We remain in the Malaysian capital, where kings, presidents, and prime ministers lined up at the Summit of Developing Nations to appeal to the world to outlaw war, to the United States not to fight Iraq, and for Baghdad to disarm. Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad set the tone at the opening of the Summit of the Non-Aligned Movement with a condemnation of war and an attack on what he called the hypocrisy of the West. Leaders at the two-day meeting sought to present a strong front in opposition to war on Iraq and to U.S. domination of the diplomatic arena. But simmering differences and a compromise on North Korea's nuclear ambitions undermined their unity. The summit was set to issue a statement that Baghdad comply with UN demands and scrap weapons of mass destruction. But it also took a swipe at the United States by stressing the need for multilateral rather than unilateral action. Many leaders stressed that NAM's desire that the United Nations and not the United States be the top world arbiter in an international issue such as Iraq. Jordan reiterated its stand against any possible attack on Iraq, saying it would not take part in any military action on Baghdad. Prime Minister Ali Abu Raghib told the Dubai-based Al Arabiya television news channel that His Majesty King Abdullah has made it clear that peace is the only means to resolve the current standoff with Iraq. He added that Jordan will not, under any circumstances, be used as a launchpad for any attack on Iraq. Asked about the deployment of U.S. troops in the kingdom, Abu Raghib stressed that the size of the U.S. contingent is small and will only serve in operating anti-missile defensive systems. The missiles will only be used for defensive purposes. He added that the U.S. force in Jordan has no relation to any military campaign against Iran. Staying on the same issue, UN Chief Weapons Inspector Hans Blix has rejected Iraq's call for dialogue over the Al-Samud missiles and called on Baghdad to begin destroying them by Saturday. He told reporters after a meeting of the UN Monitoring, Verification and Inspection Commission that he did not expect any more talks with Iraq on the issue.
We would expect them to accept what we have said and to destroy the missiles as we have stated. They have all done so in the past, always when UNSCOM and when we have requested so.
Iraq denied that the range of the Al-Samud 2 missiles exceeded the allowed limits set by the UN and had conducted a missile test in the presence of UN arms experts to examine their range. However, Baghdad called for further talks over the issue. The destruction of the missiles could further weaken Iraq's defense capabilities on the eve of the conflict. Meanwhile, weapons inspectors continued their search at a technology institute outside the capital as a South African team arrived in Iraq to share experience on shedding banned weapons. A disarmament experts delegation led by the South African Deputy Foreign Minister has held talks with senior Iraqi officials in Baghdad. The experts had led their country's voluntary drive to shed weapons of mass destruction after the end of apartheid system in South Africa. At the Zafaraniya Technology Institute, students demonstrated against the threat of war as the inspectors were shown around. Meanwhile, Turkey's government has declared that it will send a motion to Parliament to allow U.S. troops to be deployed in the country for a possible invasion of Iraq, but said it had yet to seal a final deal with the United States on the terms. The resolution could be passed as soon as tomorrow. But Turkey could delay admission of U.S. troops to ports and air bases until it signed a memorandum of understanding with the United States after the settlement of financial and military terms. A parliamentary vote would be a big step forward for Washington, which is eager to seal a deal for a northern front. Meanwhile, the U.S. military continued to prepare for a possible war on Iraq with the arrival of some 6,000 Marines in Kuwait. Scores of troops from the 1st Marine Division were flown by helicopter from the 7 amphibious ships that carried them from California to the Kuwaiti desert, where they will set up camp. The remainder will be ferried to the desert over the next few days. Germany has also started the transfer of NATO AWACS planes for deployment in Turkey. The deployment follows the NATO Defense Planning Committee announcement on authorizing defensive measures to assist Turkey and will provide surveillance and early warning for defensive purposes.
President Hosni Mubarak held a meeting with the political ministerial group in the presidential palace in Cairo to review the outcome of his latest visits to Germany and France. Minister of Information Safwat Sharif said the president's review focused on talks with German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder and French President Jacques Chirac, which he said clarified Egypt's stance towards the Iraq crisis and the Palestinian issue. Sharif said President Mubarak's talks highlighted the need to avoid the choice of war and use all possible means to ensure the implementation of international resolutions. He said that President Mubarak, during his meeting with the French and German leaderships, stressed the importance of all parties, be it Iraq or the UN, implementing Resolution 1441, which gives the weapons inspectors the chance to fulfill their duties. Sharif quoted President Mubarak as saying that during his visit to Paris, there was a chance of discussing the situation in the Middle East with a number of African leaders taking part in the Franco-African Summit. U.S. President George W. Bush argued on Monday that UN action on a new resolution paving the way for war against Iraq would determine whether or not it's going to be relevant to future global crisis. Bush said the fresh resolution spells out what the world has witnessed the last month.
The Iraqi regime is not disarming. The Iraqi regime is not disarming as required by last fall's unanimous vote of the Security Council. Saddam Hussein's refusal to comply with the demands of the civilized world is a threat to peace, and it's a threat to stability. It's a threat to the security of our country.
Iraq's top disarmament liaison officer general Hussam Mohammed Amin said that Baghdad was seriously considering the missiles destruction order from UN Chief Weapons Inspector Hans Blix. Diplomats said any lengthy delay in complying with the UN demand to destroy the As-Samud 2 missiles starting March 1st would play into the hands of the United States searching for a war pretext. At the same time, Iraq stresses that the weapons may not breach UN rules in the first place, but in order to prove that, it needs more time. However, the only lacking element in the Iraqi crisis is time.
Iraq test-fired a rocket engine at the Fallujah site on Sunday to show UN inspectors the Al-Samud 2 missile could not violate the 150-kilometer range limit set by the United Nations. UN experts also visited a number of sites in and around Baghdad, some of which are involved in the production and testing of the missile. Baghdad says the missile was designed to stay within the limit, and it only exceeded the limit during previous tests due to technical mistakes, and this did not mean that all final versions would trespass the allowed range. But UN Chief Weapons Inspector Hans Blix has ordered Iraq to start destroying its Al-Samud 2 missiles by March 1, saying they exceed the permitted range. Facing a most probable US-led attack, Iraq finds it difficult to reduce its capability to defend itself. Nevertheless, Iraq's top disarmament liaison officer, General Hussam Mohammed Amin, said Blix's ultimatum is taken very seriously.
Iraq has received on 21st February a letter from Mr. Hans Blix asks for the destruction of Al-Samud 2 missiles. The letter is still under deep consideration. We have sent a letter on 19 February in which we asked the MOBIC to dispatch a team of specialists and experts to discuss Al-Samud 2 missile issue. We did not yet receive any response to our letter.
Amin also said UN weapons inspectors have conducted their first interviews with Iraqi scientists without using audio recordings, adding his country had submitted new names of scientists to be interviewed. He said the inspectors have searched 635 sites since they began in November and would use a French Mirage warplane in the coming few days during their inspections. A group of scientists who led South Africa's own voluntarily program to shed all weapons of mass destruction after the end of apartheid in 1994 were holding meetings Monday with Iraqi officials after arriving on Sunday in Baghdad.
Now, as you know, last time we came and we said that our people who were involved in the disarmament will come and share experiences, learn from Iraqis and give them our own experiences. So we come in just to exchange ideas.
What do you hope will be the outcome of this meeting, and how long are the experts going to stay?
Well, as long as our hosts want us, and the outcome we hope will that we can contribute to stopping the war.
But few are optimistic that war can be averted, despite wide international opposition to war and the resistance of major world players to Washington's drive towards a military conflict. US President George W. Bush has warned time is short and that a new Iraq resolution to be unveiled in the next few days would be the United Nations' last chance to show its relevance. Meanwhile, peace activists acting as human shields against a possible US-led attack marched on the UN building with peace delegates from Bahrain. Another group of activists set up a camp at the Baghdad power plant to deter any attacks on the facility. The power plant, which was attacked during 1991 Gulf War, is one of the city's main sources of electricity. European human shields also gathered on the Al Jumhuriyah bridge in the center of the capital. The bridge was bombed during the previous war. Another group of mainly Japanese anti-war protesters demonstrated outside the Japanese embassy. Also, the UN Children's Fund and Iraqi health workers began a 5-day campaign to vaccinate 4 million Iraqi children against polio. But shall the vaccines protect Iraqi children from American Tomahawk missiles or smart bombs?
Ten Palestinian citizens were killed today by the Israeli occupation forces during its incursions into Beit Hanun, Nablus, Khan Yunis, and Tul Karam governorates. The martyrs are Ayman Abu Sharar, 22 years old, from the Bridge refugee camp; Mahmoud Muhammad Abu Zahir, 15 years old, from Khan Yunis city; Ahmad Eid Afana, 17 years old, from Tel al-Za'atar neighborhood in Jabalia town; Bara Faiz al-Afifi, 17 years old, from Beit Hanun town; Mahmoud Muhammad Ahwala, 28 years old, from Jabalia refugee camp; Muhammad Ramadan al-Kahlu, 27 years old, from Jabalia refugee camp; Wa'il al-Ghirbawi, 22 years old, from Jabalia refugee camp; Yusuf Abu Sharia, 19 years old, from Sabra neighborhood in Gaza City; Nasser Salim Ja'ara, 15 years old, from Nablus City; and martyr Muayyad Mustafa Salama, 24 years old, from Tul Karam City. Meanwhile, Palestinian masses sent off to their final resting place today the bodies of 3 Palestinian citizens who were killed by the Israeli occupation forces. Martyr Yusuf Abu Sharia, who was killed this morning by Israeli occupation forces during their incursion into Beit Hanun town. Martyr Ayman Abu Sharia, 30 years old, from the Bridge refugee camp, who was killed this dawn during the Israeli incursion into Beit Hanun town. And martyr Nasser Samh Ja'ara, 14 years old, who was killed this morning due to wounds he sustained yesterday by the occupation's fire in the old town of Nablus City. Israel continues its terrorist aggression on the Palestinian people, committing extrajudicial execution of civilians and destroying homes in Beit Hanun, north of Gaza Strip. More details in the following report by our colleague Linda Wafi.
Many Palestinian citizens were killed and wounded today by the Israeli occupation forces in a new Israeli terrorist offensive on the densely populated cities of Beit Hanun, Khan Yunis, Nablus, and Tul Karam. Hospital sources said that Ahmed Eid Afana, Mahmoud Houaila, Mohammed Al-Kahloud, Ayman Abu Sharar, and Wael Al-Gharbawi were shot dead this morning in the northern Gaza Strip city of Beit Hanun as they sustained heavy Israeli bullets. These sources added that a number of other civilians were wounded due to the Israeli indiscriminate fire shots by the Israeli occupation troops in different directions in the Beit Hanun city. Beit Hanun city was exposed early today to an offensive Israeli attack when more than 40 Israeli tanks backed by combat helicopters invaded this morning the city under a barrage of heavy gunfire, Palestinian security sources said. These sources added that the invading Israeli occupation troops stormed the city mainly from the northern border checkpoint of Beit Hanun, taking the old railway road, deploying in their forces the city's streets and alleyways under a barrage of heavy tank and helicopter shelling. The Israeli troops imposed a comprehensive curfew on Beit Hanun and barred access of medical crews and press into the city. A big number of civilians were wounded as Israeli tanks shot heavy indiscriminate fire on thousands of Palestinian civilians who took to the streets when the Israeli tanks began invading the city. Eyewitnesses said that thousands of Palestinian residents took out to the streets to confront the Israeli offensive on their city. Israeli troops blockaded the house of a Saba family and forced its inhabitants out to detonate it, although the owner of the house, who is the oldest member of the family, insisted to keep inside the house. The Israeli occupation tanks opened their heavy fire on the area, forcing the old man out of the house, then detonated completely, eyewitnesses told reporters. Also, Israeli troops blew up 3 more Palestinian houses owned by Zuwaidi family, local Palestinian sources said. Just north of Beit Hanun, 1 more Palestinian citizen was shot dead by the Israeli occupation troops. Another Palestinian citizen was also killed early this morning near the illegitimate Jewish settlement of Netzarim to the south of Gaza City. Palestinian sources said that Yusuf Abu Sharia was shot dead by Israeli troops last night at the Shuhada Junction, close to the Jewish settlement of Netzarim, which is established on Palestinians-owned lands to the south of Gaza City. These sources added that the Israeli tanks incurred early on dawn into the Sheikh Ajlin neighborhood near Netzarim under a barrage of heavy fire. In the meantime, Israeli occupation forces stationed at the illegitimate Jewish settlement of Neve Dekalim in the Gaza Strip city of Khan Younis opened heavy fire on nearby Palestinian-owned houses, killing a Palestinian youth in cold blood and causing damages to a number of the citizens' houses.
Efforts to increase the level of preparation for the internal front continues. In that regard, a wide-scale training operation was carried out in the educational system throughout the country. Furthermore, the Regional Rescue Unit was also included in the training. Our military reporter, Eli Kahil, provided us with this report.
To increase the level of internal readiness for the possible American attack against Iraq, a wide-scale training operation was carried out in most Israeli schools. This training is part of a series of training exercises that were carried out by school administrations. The training included educational campaigns to teach students how to use gas masks. Students participated in rescue operations by sliding through a rubber tube.
I believe that if we are faced with a situation with a real need to evacuate people from an area that was attacked to another one effectively, then we will do that.
The
regional training unit, which belongs to the leadership of Internal Front, has been practicing rescue operations to teach rescue workers how to treat victims that were exposed to chemical or biological attacks.
This training is unique because it trains rescue workers on how to save victims of chemical attacks, though this scenario is not likely to happen. Today, we have the capability to rescue people from chemical or biological attacks if they are exposed to them. Thus, the answer is yes.
In the schools, villages, and cities that are located along the confrontation line in the northern borders, training was focused on how to protect people from the conventional missiles that may be launched from the Lebanese territories toward Israel.
The elementary school of Me'alim village, like all other schools in the country, has been training their students how to go to shelters if schools are targeted by missiles. The training was carried out under the supervision of the Internal Front and security officials from Ma'arif Ministry and local authority.
Yes, we have fear. All the students are afraid, and because of that, we have shelters. We must constantly practice so we can deal with difficult situations and live in peace. Because we have enough shelters, the training became effective and organized, as you can see.
In the villages that are located along the confrontation line along the northern border with Lebanon, training is focused on teaching people how to protect themselves from missiles launched by Hezbollah, especially when the war against Iraq begins.
It is possible to train Arabic villages along the northern borders. Also, it is possible to obtain more equipment to end the lack of equipment in schools.
Schools in the northern part of the country are working to prepare their students for the possible war without putting them in a state of fear or panic.
The Islamic Revolution's leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei arrived in Zahedan in the southeastern Iranian province of Sistan Baluchistan on Sunday. The Islamic Revolution's leader, addressing a huge gathering of Zahedan's residents, expresses gratitude to the people for their sincere and warm welcome and emphasized all the state-run organizations and officials are bound to take every stride to eradicate deprivation in the province. The leader pointed out the Islamic system takes pride in the unity and rapport between the Shiites and Sunnis throughout the country, underscoring the solidarity between Shiites and Sunnis in defending Islam. And Iran is a clear indication that all people are aware of the enemy's divisive plots and that they will bravely safeguard the Islamic establishment by vigilance and unity. In another part of his words, Ayatollah Khamenei referred to the U.S. officials' lies that they advocate peace, human rights, and democracy, and said Washington claims it is attacking Iraq to secure its interests, like Hitler, who had similar justifications for waging a war on other countries. The Islamic Revolution, later referring to the anti-war demonstrations in 160 countries, underscored the worldwide anti-U.S. sentiments are just the beginning, and that any U.S. attack on Iraq will backfire on them, since the interests that U.S. officials think they will gain will turn into a menace to them. The Islamic Revolution's leader on Sunday also met a gathering of Shiite and Sunni scholars and clergymen in the province. In his remarks, Ayatollah Khamenei reiterated all people, especially the clergymen, should be vigilant and enjoin unity and rapport on Shiites and Sunnis more than ever before. Iranian President Mohammad Khatami, who has traveled to Malaysia to attend the 13th Non-Aligned Movement Summit, arrived in Kuala Lumpur Sunday afternoon and was received by top Malaysian officials.
Before leaving Tehran, President Khatami underscored the danger posed by a unipolar world is more than that of a bipolar one, adding the attitude has become worldwide today and even powerful European countries oppose the policy of unilateralism. He pointed to the critical situation in the world at the moment and expressed hope the 13th Non-Aligned Movement Summit to be convened in Malaysia will play a key role in safeguarding the rights and interests of those countries which like to be independent. Seen off by a number of top officials, Mr. Khatami left Tehran for Kuala Lumpur Sunday morning.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support provided by Henry and Virgilia Dakin.